In this video, I'm going to be going over some pretty basic guidelines that you can follow when you're forging your first pairs of tongs. Hi, I'm Dennis Frechette and welcome back. Today I'm working on the second reference video in the series that I'm producing. This one's on blacksmithing tongs, and in this video I've laid out a series of guidelines that you can follow to help you figure out all the different kinds of tongs that you're going to want to make. All of these reference videos are listed in the description, so if you find one of these videos, you'll be able to go into the description and find links to all the other videos that I have in the series. So, hope this helps you out, and we'll see you on the next one. Here I have two bars laid out based on one of the patterns that I have provided. The bottom one has center punch marks, and they represent a section of bar that needs to be forged down to a certain dimension. And on the top one, I've just reinforced those center punch marks with chisel cuts so I can find them a little easier when I'm working with the hot metal. Here I'm using 5/8 square bar for these tongs. It's just hot rolled mild steel. There's nothing special about it. I like 5/8 square bar because it's heavy enough to produce a good sized pair of tongs, but it's still light enough to be forged easily. Here I'm starting to forge out a pair of tongs, and I'm working on the handle end of the tongs. And the reason I'm doing that is because if you don't have a pair of tongs, then this is the first pair that you are forging. You can put the two jaws together in the center of the bar and have the handles pointing out. So the one side of the bar will be cool enough that you can handle the bar in order to forge the one set of handles, and then cool that off, flip it around to forge the other set of handles, and then you can cut the bar in the middle and forge the working end of the tongs. So it's a good way to forge a pair of tongs if you don't have a pair of tongs. In the patterns that I've provided, I've divided the bar stock for the handles into two sections. And I did that because most people starting out have a real problem with forging that long taper that you need for the reins. But by dividing it into two sections, you can see that it really isn't a long taper at all, or at least it doesn't have to be. It's really a heavier section close to the hinge area, and that transitions into basically a square section towards the end, and then there's a little short transition between those two bar stocks. So by dividing it into two separate areas that you need to forge, it makes it a little easier to get consistent results. In this example, I am using a pair of tongs to hold the work, so I'm just going to follow the heat up the bar and start forging the sections that I need for the jaws of the tongs. You can see how I've rough forged the section for the handles, but I haven't forged anything to its final dimensions yet. And then the final step of the process is to follow the heat back down the bar and shape the handle to its final dimension. And a properly shaped handle has a heavier rectangular section up near the hinge area, and then that transitions to a smaller square section at the end of the handle. So the idea behind this exercise is not to create finished tongs right away. I'm suggesting that you create a number of tong blanks ahead of time that cover the different types of tongs that you want to make. Get the experience hammering and measuring while you're making the tong blanks, and then that'll give you a little bit more experience to tackle the actual finishing and fitting of the pairs of tongs or any other ironwork that you're doing. But this is a good way to get a lot of forging time in and get something out of it, because you'll have a series of tong blanks that are 90% of the way there, and when you need a pair of tongs, it's just going to be a simple matter of forging the jaws to the way that you want them and attaching the two halves together. In this drawing, you're looking at the basic dimensions for the tong blanks. On the left side of the drawing, you'll see just a basic rectangle that's just defined as 1 to 4 inches. Those are the actual tong jaws. That dimension will be specified in the following examples. The next square to the right is the hinge area for the tongs, and you can see how it gets forged out into approximately a 3/8 by 3/4 inch rectangle. The next two squares represents the bar stock that is needed for the handles of the tongs. And as I mentioned earlier, the heaviest section is right next to the hinge area, and that's 3/8 by half, and that transitions into a square area that is roughly 3/8 square. The next two drawings define the length of the bar stocks that you're going to need for the two different types of tongs that you might want to make. On the top, they're standard full-size tongs, and the reins will hammer out to approximately 16 inches. The lower drawing is what I call winter tongs. They're a full-size pair of tongs just with shorter handles, and they are a little more maneuverable around heavy clothing like a jacket or mitts or something like that. This drawing shows the dimensions that I use for my standard flat bit tongs. I start off with the 1.5 inch offset. That gets drawn out to a roughly 2-inch length and 3/4 of an inch in width. If I decide that I want to make a narrow flat bit tong, that same amount of material will draw out to roughly 2.5 inches. And again, the reins are standard for all of these examples. I make my heavy ring tongs the same way that I do my flat bit tongs. I start off with the same offset of 1.5 inches, gets forged out to the same length of 2 inches, only the jaws are curved to fit around whatever bar stock that I'm using. They're called ring tongs, but I generally use them mainly for holding punches and chisels. My small ring tongs are basically just a light-duty pair of flat bit tongs that have a small curved section at the tips. When you're forging small rings, you usually don't need the holding power that you do when you're forging heavier bar stock. So having a longer jaw will allow you to hold a greater variety of stock sizes with the same pair of tongs. Box jaw tongs are a type of tong where the jaws are not symmetrical. They're each forged in a totally separate way. The top jaw is just a standard flat bit jaw, and the bottom jaw is similar, but it is modified so that it can be formed into a U shape that wraps around the stock that you're holding. And you can see by the bottom set of drawings that the lower jaw is totally different from what we've seen so far. First of all, it's not tapering towards the tip, it's just the opposite. You're leaving as much material at the tip in order to be able to cross-peen the shape that you're going to need to form the box. And this one-piece method of forging the lower jaw can be used on smaller bar stocks, and you'll see in a moment that larger box tongs require a two-piece lower jaw to handle the widths that you need. Bolt tongs, in my opinion, are probably the most versatile tongs found in a blacksmith shop. And you should make note that this pair of tongs is the only pair in these examples where I'm using a 5/8 round bar as the bar stock. The very tips of the jaws have a V-shaped profile, so that allows you to hold round bars or square bars. And the curved opening in the jaw allows you to fit these pairs of tongs around some pretty complicated shapes. Both jaws on this pair of tongs are forged exactly the same way that I forged the lower jaw for the small box tongs. You start off at the hinge area by thinning down the main body of the jaw, but you leave extra material at the tip so that you can cross-peen out the V-shaped bit that holds the stock. When I make large box tongs, I usually forge the lower jaw by welding two different pieces together. So I'll forge basically a flat bit pair of tongs with a slight offset that wraps around the material that I'm using for the box, and I'll weld that all up into a unit and then forge the lower jaw so it has a flat profile on the inside face. For regular box jaw tongs, the top jaw is just a standard flat bit jaw. There is a variation on these tongs that are usually called hinge tongs because the upper jaw is curved to wrap around the hinge barrel. Pickup tongs are basically just long, slender, flat bit tongs. You can leave the jaws straight or you can curve them, but basically they're a material handling tong. They're used a lot for reaching into a fire to pull a piece back into the right spot in the fire, or to move it, or do something like that. Or if you're assembling something and you need an extra pair of tongs to hold on to a hot piece of work, quite often pickup tongs will do quite well in a situation like that. They're never used for forging. They don't have the holding power that you need for forging, but there are a lot of situations where you just need to handle hot material, and pickup tongs are usually just fine for that. Heavy-duty bolt tongs are forged exactly the same way as I forged the light-duty tongs, only here you'll note that I went back to using the 5/8 square bar that I used for all the other examples. These are the tongs that I use the most in my shop. They are a little heavier by today's standards, but I prefer a heavy pair of tongs. It's what I've always used, and it's my preference. But the point of these videos is to allow you to make tongs however you want them. So take the information you have here and make something that's custom to fit the way you work.